Hi, this is Johannes Willheim. Welcome to my podcast on dispute management. I'm here today with Mike McIllwrath, Global Litigation Counsel of Baker Hughes. This is really a great opportunity because Mike is a thought leader in dispute management, and he's also a very, very inspiring human. What we'll do is we'll talk about who Mike is, what his work actually is, his career journey, his leadership style, and what drives him to contribute so much to the world of dispute management. Now, if you are a student or an aspiring dispute manager or dispute professional, this podcast will actually give you a lot of food to think and a lot of practical tips to plan your own career. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike, why don't you tell us who you are?
Who am I? I grew up in Northern California. I went to university at the University of California, Berkeley. I studied literature, American literature, and history. And I'll say right now, I think the most valuable course I've taken in life, and it really helped me in my profession, had nothing to do with this, but it was actually, and I mean this very seriously, underwater research, scuba diving, which was training to do something that, if you look at it, seems very dangerous at the beginning, but as you learn more about it, you learn that there are ways of managing risk so that it's really not risky at all, and actually can be something that's very enriching and a lot of fun. After university, I moved to Italy, both Sicily and then Florence in Tuscany, where I lived for about 5 years teaching English and working for a magazine for students of English, writing articles this is the 1980s before there was an internet, so providing materials in English language in simplified form. And then I got a little bit bored with that and decided that I would like to go to law school.
And that was not boring?
It was interesting, but you do the same thing for a few years and you'd like to have some change. And so I went back to the States and I went to law school in upstate New York at the University of Cornell Law School. Then went and worked in New York City at a large law firm for about 5 years. When then speaking Italian, I was asked by General Electric, which had just fairly recently acquired a very large a company that was based in Florence, but had operations all over the world. There's a leader in the compression and rotating equipment technology for the oil and gas industry. And that company, I moved there with my family in 1999, and the company has grown phenomenally since then. Today, we're now part of, actually, it's one of the many parts of Baker Hughes GE, a 62% controlled by the General Electric company. And we're, I'd say, a leading supplier of technology and services for the oil and gas industry.
I mean, we're here in Vienna at the final rounds of a mediation competition organized by the IBA and the VIAC, the CDRC. I think there's global teams from all over the world of students competing in mediation. Now, why does somebody like you come to an event like this?
First of all, let me just this is the CDRC, the Consensual Dispute Resolution Competition, is a fantastic event. I mean, if you're a student anywhere in the world, and not just if you're interested in mediation, I think if you're interested in solving problems and developing skills that will serve you in life and in the practice of law, particularly being able to negotiate, to collaborate, to problem solve. It's a fantastic competition. It's unique in that you don't just have teams competing against each other in their advocacy, but we also have student mediators who are trying to facilitate them in the process. I've been here every year since its inception 4 years ago. It's a blast. It's a great time to come. So I think both for students and also for people who would like to come here and just observe or potentially be what we call here assessors, not judges, but those who assess the competitors, it's a great experience.
But does that also mean that you, in your actual work, do you use mediation
Not as much as we would like. We are a big believer, both in my division and across General Electric, in the usefulness of mediation as a tool to resolve conflict earlier and better at less cost for the parties, and preserve relationships as well.
Do you use other ADR methods?
We use a lot of arbitration, a lot of both domestic and international arbitration, and mediation. I'd say those are the two main tools that we use outside of just simply going into the courts and litigating disputes. In addition to the negotiating, I mean, there's a lot of negotiation that goes on trying to resolve conflict earlier.
Now, Mike, let me ask you this. So your business people, your engineers come to you and say they have a problem. Yeah. They may have a pending dispute. How do you go about deciding how do I actually manage or resolve this?
Yeah, I have this joke I always say, you always come to me after the equipment breaks. You should come to me before the equipment broke. I would tell you, don't break the equipment. We try, which is kind of a funny way of saying that, I think all dispute lawyers, we like to think of ourselves as people who prevent or try to be proactive in resolving things. So the earlier that we can get involved, and that's really the kind of the game that we play, is how early is it right to be involved in disputes? I mean, you don't want to get involved in something that people can work out on their own and potentially interfere with that process. So a lot of what we do, I think, is trying to reorient people along a path where they can work things out for, in a way that's good for the company and hopefully also good for the other side.
But do you use any sort of analytical tools in order to determine how do I go now about resolving this dispute? Is it better to go to mediation? Is it better to take this to a court in New York or to arbitration? Do you implement anything like the CPR toolkits? Do you have that in place? And do you have processes in your group?
Right, so look, across General Electric, the answer is yes. Although, I mean, when I joined GE in 1999, again, maybe it's useful here to illustrate a little bit how I wound up with the toolkits that I use today. I was the first litigator to be hired by this international business. We had operations in 100 companies. This is this company where I'm based, just this division where I'm based in Florence. And I was hired because they had a lot of conflict. They had no legal department. We were acquired from the ENI, the state-owned oil and gas company from the Italian government, privatized into General Electric. And the general counsel who hired me was going around building a legal department, and he needed an M&A specialist because they wanted to grow. He needed somebody to help lead the transactional practice, and they needed someone to help resolve the conflicts. And so I was the first really to come in with this specialty. And I found when I started, and I remember in January 1999, I was immediately overwhelmed. There was just a lot of conflict. By the time 2 or 3 months down into my job, I was actually had time to catch my breath and count how many disputes around the world I was responsible for managing. The number was 146. I wasn't getting home at night. It was incredible. It was insane. And I was looking for tools, like how can I manage this? How can I get my hands on this in a way that I'm not going to get fired, and and the company will think that they're getting good results from these disputes. And I came across on the company database, so the company online web facilities that we had, at least that existed in 1999, and I found this thing called EDR program, Early Dispute Resolution, and it was authored by a guy named P.D. Villarreal, who has long ago left General Electric and is now the head of litigation. I think today he's the head of litigation at GlaxoSmithKline, a pharmaceutical company. And PD was very innovative in working with CPR, in working with, he went into companies like Motorola and found the processes that they were applying to resolve their disputes earlier rather than later. And Motorola at that time, and you have to give credit to the companies who really were pioneers in this field, Motorola had developed a process based on the Six Sigma approach of a way of eliminating or reducing defects that treats conflict it looks at conflict in terms of cycle time. It says the longer the cycle goes, the more that you have a risk of winding up with bad results, but also higher costs that you impose on the company. So what they found is that the earlier you can resolve the disputes, the lower the more you can reduce the costs of them. So Motorola had designed this system using Six Sigma. GE, being an engineering company at the time, was also in the throes of going into its own Six Sigma revolution of trying to reduce the amount of defects per available opportunity. And PD had developed this Six Sigma-based approach called early dispute resolution. The biggest component of early dispute resolution was this notion of early case assessment. The idea that if you can understand early in the life of a dispute how it's going to end up at the end and how much it's going to cost you to get there, then maybe you can negotiate or find some other way of getting a good outcome without having to spend all of those resources and imposing all those other costs that are almost impossible to quantify, which is the distraction to the business of having your people really spending their time talking about the past, when instead what you want them to be doing is getting new contracts, building new projects, delivering new equipment and services to your customers. So it's more forward-facing. Yeah.
Mike, many of our listeners and viewers are students. Early case assessment, that sounds super abstract to me. Can you sort of break us a little bit down what the content is? Like, what can I envisage when I think about it?
So here's an interesting thing about the early case assessment. So we had this EDR, Early Dispute Resolution Program, which had as its objective, resolve your conflicts early. But we had many different divisions of GE. I was that of litigation at the oil and gas division. I had a colleague in the power division, building power plants. Others in aircraft engines business, other in transportation, delivering locomotives or railway signaling around the world. We have this enormous GE Capital with banking, insurance, et cetera. A healthcare business, which was enormous. Very different businesses, but the core thing that they all shared was this early dispute resolution approach. One of my colleagues was hired, I think this was around 2005 or 2006, so it was several years after I had begun at the company. And I had changed the process to fit my business. Like I didn't follow what PD had initially developed because it was very much US-based, thinking of massive cost of discovery, things you can do. And I said, a lot of my cases are international arbitrations or they're cases that are pending in the courts of civil law jurisdictions. I don't need a lot of that, but these other things I do need. So I modified the EDR to fit my business.
What are the key elements?
So here's the interesting thing. So my colleague, Roland Schroeder, when he was hired and came on board, he was tasked to figure out what are the commonalities. He said, it seems like we're all doing early dispute resolution, but we're all doing it differently. And he went around and he surveyed us, and what he found is that what we all did an early case assessment. So we had many different ways of doing things, but we all came back to the ECA. And the ECA is done a little bit differently, but at its core, what it says, and what my ECA process is, or at least the ECA process that we have in the business for which I'm responsible for, is I would tell the law firm in very simple terms, if you're using a lawyer, or you can do the ECA internally, you don't have to hire an outside counsel, but you'd say, I need just this from you. Okay, how you get there, I'm going to largely leave it with you, but the conclusion has to be, best case, worst case, most likely, how is this going to turn out? In other words, can you express in terms that a business manager understands the likelihood of getting a contract and how much we will earn the contract? Can you do the same thing for a conflict and say, best case, worst case, most likely, this is how this is going to play out? And can you tell me separately, best case, worst case, most likely, what's it going to cost me? Once you have those, you ought to have also a sense of, well, then what should be our objective, right? I mean, obviously, if we can negotiate today something that's better than the most likely outcome in the arbitration, if you're in arbitration, and it's going to cost us less, do that.
But your business is super complex. It's engineering. It's so many unknown factors. Aren't many of your outside counsel saying, look, Mike, this really depends on a number of factors and it's very hard to predict? It's like, how do they base this analysis on most likely, worst case? Yeah. What is it they factor in?
They do it or they don't work. They do it or they don't work with us. I mean, that's no. I think so. Here's something we used to get right with lawyers. You would say, I need to understand just the cost component. How much will this case cost me? And what you would get from the lawyers, and this is I think this is generational. It was more the case 20 years ago than today. They would say, I swear, you would get this in different languages from around the world. Litigation is inherently unpredictable. Our hourly rates are the following. We work very efficiently and we will try to keep our costs down, but we cannot provide you with an estimate. We would never work with anybody who wrote that. Because what we would say is, if you're a litigator and you're an expert in your field, you should be able to predict. I assume if we're hiring you, you've done this at least 10 times, 20 times before. Why can't you tell me? I'm not asking you to tell me, to give me a binding budget. I'm just saying, give me an estimate of what this will cost. So I assume that within your competencies and your experience, you do have the ability to do that. Just the question is whether or not you want to do it or your firm will let you do it.
Do you have any stats on the accuracy of your ECAs?
You know, we did a few years ago. I don't have them at the top of my head, but one of my former general counsels at one point actually asked us to track those. All I can tell you is they're highly accurate, because by the time, you get a general idea, a good idea when you start off, but as you refine it as you go, by the time you're at the end, you know what the outcome is likely to be. You don't tend to have many surprises.
Mm-hmm. So if I would sort of brand or label your ECAs as an analytical tool, do you use any other analytical tools such as decision tree analysis or even sophisticated algorithms? Is there any techniques you apply today?
No, I wish we did. If you have any we would be open to seeing them, but no, we don't. A lot of our conflict is it's the interaction with the people. It's talking to the people, to the business leaders, and working with them to develop a strategy. But no, we don't use a decision tree. I think maybe one of the reasons that I don't want to say we don't find that useful because we haven't used it. I can't say it definitively. But I think there may be less demand for that because we have the ECA process, which provokes a conversation over, okay, now we know how this was likely to turn out. What are we going to do about it?
How many people work in your group, in your department?
Well, in litigation, which not just my department, I'd say globally in litigation, my group right now is just like me and a couple of interns right now, or external counsel who we call them visiting counsel, who may help on an as-needed basis. The litigation function across the business, which is mainly dedicated to North America, but it also includes other things like collections, insurance, and there's also some of the compliance function there. I think it's probably 15, 16 people. Across GE, I don't know the number for certain, but I would guess it's probably around 30 people who are full-time dispute-oriented lawyers.
Do you have like a standard way of managing your projects? And do you help people train and learn how to manage projects?
We do a lot of training. Okay. Now, I think you're asking me about the training that we give to my team or the people I work with. Actually, we spend more time training the people who give rise to conflict.
Clients,
so
yeah.
our clients.
Our internal
and
clients.
We do it for two reasons. One is to prevent conflict, but the other is also it's our way of connecting with our clients. So as law firms offer training to clients like us, we offer training to the project managers, to some of the people who are involved in commercial operations. And we offer courses that we know that we can give them from the value of our experience and that they want to take because they believe they need it. So we teach a lot of negotiation training. Like, for example, we don't teach mediation because we don't expect our people to mediate. But we do expect them to negotiate well and to have good skills at being able to figure out, hey, maybe our interests here are overlapping. It goes back to your earlier question, why am I here in Vienna at this mediation competition? Well, mediation is a lot about finding common interests, right? Your positions may differ, but you may still find room for agreement. So that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time with our I'd say our project management world for the most part. We also teach liquidated damages, which is something that comes a lot when you're in the big, so we teach courses that are focused on, or seminars that are focused on the key legal types of things that give rise to disputes. So that when the business people or the engineers find themselves working with or butting heads with the other side, they have a higher level of sophistication over what the dispute is about, so they don't have to come to us as much. And when they do, they come much more informed. And we've also been teaching a lot of how to write. That's also one of the things that drives you crazy. So I have a course that we've been doing for the past year on effective claim writing or responses.
It's actually the next topic I wanted to touch with you was communication, and writing is part of communication. Do you have like standards of how you want people to communicate with you, so that you know which type of information is communicated through which channels? Do you have like any communication systems? Do you have like writing styles in order to make sure that you identify at the right moment important information and that you get it as soon as possible?
Well, let me separate. So outside counsel who communicate with me or my colleagues, I think we want them to communicate appropriately, not overwhelm us, but also keep us apprised and let us know. And make sure that we're all focused on a common objective and we understand what that objective is. So I think that's one, you usually get that right these days. That's not a big problem. Where we spend more time is with my clients, with the business, the engineer people. And we're a global company. We have people all over the world. So you can't pretend that you can teach to them how to write in Chinese or Portuguese. We're not going to, make you the next great Portuguese Nobel Prize winner in literature, right? That's not the objective. The course that we teach to people is to try to get them focused on what's their objective. And a lot of the correspondence that we see, and I'm sure you see a lot of it too, is like you look at it and go, why did you send that letter? What was your objective? And you ask people, and again, you don't want to offend people, you don't want to insult them, so you say, well, the other side's, project manager, ticked me off, and so. And so I felt, they said nasty things about me and about us, and I felt that we needed to respond. I said, well, why? I mean, what objective are you advancing by sending this letter? And when you get people thinking about their objectives, then the writing process behind that becomes easier for them.
Mm. Mike, your work is truly global. Your company is truly global. How do you navigate cultural differences?
Yeah, I don't. I think this is actually something I think I've been respectful. I think I've been successful because I've been respectful of people. I think actually one of my former colleagues, Maria Barcelona, who's now the general counsel of Nokia, paid me a very nice compliment one time, which she said she was my colleague in the business and was responsible for all of the contracts that were negotiated. So in theory, a lot of my dispute work came from defects generated, from within her world, right? And she said, I never criticized anybody, and because I realized that a lot of the contracts that have problems with them, it's not because people were stupid or they didn't understand the consequences of the words they were putting in. They were under pressure. They were trying to get a deal done. We're all trying to work towards the best possible outcome. And sometimes you wind up with things that aren't perfect, right? You try to learn from that and do what you can next time to improve. So I think that we've always tried to work collaboratively with people to help them. What you really want to do to be successful in a company, right, is you don't want to come in there and say, you're an idiot, you screwed this up, don't do this. What you want to do is to say, how can I make you more successful at your job, right? And so I think that's if you have that as your operating style, it doesn't really matter which culture that you're working with, because you're listening to them and you're trying to figure out, well, what are your needs? What are the pressures that you're dealing with? Why haven't you been able to resolve this? And how can I maybe help you bridge that gap?
I pick you up on the success word. If you would give advice to people who want to do what we do, work in dispute management or resolve disputes, what would be your advice to them in order to be successful in today's environment?
But first of all, I would say students graduating today already have vastly better skills than our generation did. I finished law school in 1994. I didn't know anything about international arbitration. I thought mediation was something that was only for family law disputes. I didn't know you could use it in commercial cases. Most of what I learned through trial and error, very inefficiently. People graduating today as lawyers around the world, they know what these processes are. Many of them come to competitions like this. Not only do they understand them, they've actually been able to practice them. So and the conversations you have with people who are just out of law school these days, it's incredible. You speak to people as if they are colleagues with 10 years, 12 years experience, and it's phenomenal. So I think, being the best lawyer you can is almost a given these days. The question is, how do you differentiate yourself in a pool where other people are just so damn talented right now? I think
of that every time I'm a juror in these competitions.
Isn't it incredible?
Like, gosh,
it's incredible. It's amazing. It's amazing. You are humble. You really, and you don't. It's not paying a false compliment. You really have to be humbled. I mean, for example, the fact that you have a podcast like this today. Well, that didn't exist 25 years ago. You could not watch someone like you talking to people or me, to the extent that
you have your own podcast.
I have my own podcast many years ago, but it was audio, not video. So I think the question is, how do you differentiate yourself in this market? One avenue is, I think that a lot of people pursue that, which I think has a lot of sense, there are a lot of master's programs or ways of getting some additional education. You take, for example, the field of international arbitration. There's still only very few institutions that will offer like a specialized master's in international arbitration, and they're in very high demand. I think, for example, Patricia Shaughnessy, who runs the program in Stockholm at the University of Stockholm,
I have the pleasure of teaching in this course.
It's great. She's an amazing course. She, I think, gets something like 900 applications for 25 places. So that tells you there's demand out there. Beyond the education and the preparation, I think from a perspective of an in-house lawyer, the things that make you successful for us are having practical skills. And those practical skills are, that's just two things come to mind. One is project management, and the other is negotiation. Two things that I was never taught, either in law school or when I was working in a law firm. Project management, because you need to understand how to break things apart these days. Some people call it unbundling, where you take apart cases. You may find that you're working with you would hire someone like you for the high-end, terrific value you bring to the case, but I don't need your firm necessarily to do a lot of the document review. Maybe I'll have that done out of Ireland or India or some other place, and but you're responsible for keeping those. And that's just one simple way of how you might break apart a particular case. You need to be able to understand how the case is going to evolve over time, and even if you're letting the law firm project management, you need to supervise that project management. So it's a constant skill.
So who would do that in your view? Would you do this internally, the supervision, or would you retain outside counsel to also do the supervision and bring the different bits and pieces?
No, we do
together?
that. We do that. So it's much more effective for us if we make our own deal, for example, with document production. We would make our deal with a vendor to do that. We would supervise that process and have them working with a law firm separately. We might be the ones, for example, to retain the experts. Why? Well, because we're an engineering company, we often know who the experts are. So already you've got now 3 different pieces, right? You have some documents, you have some experts, you have your outside counsel. That's project management.
Yeah. How many of these pieces you see in a typical case do you think will be handled in the future by technology?
A lot of it. Yeah, I think a lot of it. I think not the next year or two, but I think we're getting there where technology is creeping in and it makes it easier.
Are there fields where you use already today technology?
We use ODR. We use online dispute resolution. We have in all of our out of Italy, in fact, all of our purchasing contracts have a standard term where for disputes under 100,000 euros, we have mediation and arbitration by documents only online. And you can find this if you go online for the ICDR protocol for the online resolution of industrial disputes. We use, yeah, and I think we'll see more of that. By the way, that's one, project management. Other thing is negotiation. We started a program over 15 years ago of teaching negotiation within the company, thinking first that people they would say, well, who are you? They're lawyers. Who are you to teach me negotiation? We actually found that they loved it. They wanted to have it. And so we've initially had people coming in. We had from Harvard or from the Wharton School of Business came in and taught some of our courses. We then realized that we couldn't keep paying those amounts, and we had to develop our own courses. And we asked our law firms if they could you share with us your negotiation training materials? And the law firm said, we don't teach negotiation training. And I said, actually, when I was at a law firm, we didn't learn negotiation either. And so we developed our own program. But I think that over time, that's an extremely valuable skill, because if you can not just understand the law and how it applies to your client in your case, but you can tell your client, look, here's how I think this will play out. Here are the negotiation opportunities that we might see for you. You can really help the client understand how they can get a good result, right? Again, this is like how I want our engineers, our project managers to be successful. That makes me successful. I think if you're an outside lawyer, if you have those skills so you have insight into how we operate, you make me more successful, right? I'm going to want to hire you more.
How do you keep your personal balance, Mike?
I don't believe in the term personal balance. Honestly. So personal, work-life balance. Quick, and my wife, by the way, who is not a lawyer, senior executive of a different company these days, shares the same view. She loves her job. She works her butt off, works very, very hard, but she loves what she does. But she also loves the family and loves being around the house. And so it's great to have things that you love and that you feel passionate about. Hopefully, you find yourself in a job that is interesting, is engaging. So you say, the balance today may be whatever. I'm working more than I'm at home, but tomorrow I'll try to make it the other way around and be more at home. I think if you're in a situation where you say, I'm working so much. Again, there are parts of life where you have to deal with this, but if you over the long term see that you want to be not in your job and you want to be someplace else, maybe you shouldn't be in that job.
Any final words of wisdom?
No.
Thank you very much. It was a good talk.
Thank you.